We are shortest until February.
Hey, as you're writing these notes, that's wonderful. So the first thing I'll do is I'll address the exam. So just so you're aware, what I do is first I find who had the high score. So in this case, the high score was 59. So the best score in the whole, both sections got 4 wrong, which is pretty good. So now the test is now out of 59, but then I throw out 7 questions because less than half of you got it right. So now it becomes a total score of 52. That becomes the total score. So all of you who got 59, 58, 57, 56, 55, 54, 53, 52, you all got 52. That was your score. I'm sorry. You can't get extra credit. There is no extra credit in here. So you all got 52, which is great. And then obviously, those of you who got less than 52, you ended up with a better grade because 11 free points, basically. You all got 11 free points. Now, before you think, oh gosh, why don't we just have everyone bomb it next time? Then, yeah, okay, all right. You get 60 kids to figure that out.
You tell everybody to do it, and then
You be the one who doesn't do it, then awesome. And just to keep in mind also that, yes, I did that this time, but as each test comes and goes, I take away. So I won't be, by the end of the year, you will all have all questions, none thrown out, no curve. But that's at the end of the year. So we'll get there, right? I'm building you up. Right, that's the end. Okay.
Oh, we have key students.
Okay. Second thing is I'm slowly progressing through Blue Book essays. If you're still not done, that's okay. It's just that you really don't have much time in class to tackle those. Whenever I have free open mod time, you're welcome to come in here, or even during when I'm teaching a class. If it doesn't bother you, it doesn't bother me. Come on in during sociology, it's fine. The biggest criticism I have so far, is that many of you answered the wrong question. And you might think, how is that possible? But many of you had paragraphs that went something like this. Schweikert and Allen argue that the Europeans were justified in colonizing America, and Zinn argues that they weren't. That's the wrong question. I don't know why you're answering that question. I never told you to say that Schweikert and Allen argued that the Europeans were justified while Zinn argues no, they weren't. That wasn't the question. The question was, why did the Europeans colonize? Schweikert and Allen said to spread religion. Zinn said for wealth. It's not if they were or not, it's why they did. And many of you answered the other question. So that's a flaw. Grammar. The endless sentence. Many of you have a sentence that's line after line long, and there's another and another comment. Good God, when's the sentence going to end? Don't be afraid of the short sentence. They're okay. Short sentences are okay. They're your friend. Yes, dear.
Mr. Lindenberg, I think we need to just work on this straight handwriting.
Okay. I didn't notice that. And a few of you were so crazy scared of the Blue Book essay that you ended up drawing lines between the lines, and then you only took less than half of the Blue Book. Well, what was the point? Just don't bother, right? Anyway, that's a minor case. Okay. Can we flush the toilet on Unit 1? Now, take a look at Unit 2. There it is. There are all your important due dates. We got to get it going.
Less than a month.
You said that already. Okay, testing window is November 13th through 15th. Today is October 14th, so it's about a month. Okay, we'll be doing this all again. See the various KIAs and their due dates. With the exception of this week, there are always 2 KIAs due per week. This week, 1 KIA due Friday. Okay. Then after this week, 2 KIAs due every week. This one is chapter 9. It's chapter
Is
9,
that
10,
next?
11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 7 chapters. Question.
Yeah.
You do have next Friday.
So let's do next Thursday.
It's due next Thursday. Yep. The 24th is a Thursday.
Wait, are we due next Thursday?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait, so Lexington, I thought.
Lexington.
We're only 2 chapters done. Oh my God, no way. No way.
That's more of a Lindy thing, so you got to talk with him.
Ah, I do have Oh my God, I'm not.
Every announcement I make, Rachel's like, "Oh my God!
No, I am not even.
You have any permission slips? Oh my God!" Right. Today, you will get, before the end of the hour, the documents for the second Blue Book essay. And you'll notice, I hope that you start to notice that there's a pattern, that there's 2 sources and there's multiple issues, and that what you're going to be asked to do is contrast the 2 sources about those 2 issues. Whether it was Pepper and Amante over ingredients and atmosphere, or Schweikert and Allen versus Zinn over Columbus, or reasons why they colonized, or which culture was superior, you pick 2, or this next one, which is Hamilton and Jefferson over taxes, or the Sedition Act, or this thing called federalism. Okay, you'll pick 2 of those 3 issues, and you'll pick a winner between Jefferson and Hamilton, both giants in American history. They did not agree with each other. In fact, they were almost polar opposites of each other. And you'll get to render a verdict about which one had the more viable view of the role of taxes, the federal government, and this will all make sense later. And then don't forget, as Rachel is apt to do, you have a paper on who shot first. That's due next week. But that's more of a Lindy thing. Right? He's sort of taken over that. Although I will revisit how a first paragraph should look. We'll revisit that. Okay, any questions on Szechuan? Yes.
What's up with ET?
Well, ET has been doing some sit-ups.
Clearly. He's
right.
working hard.
That's right. Well, I don't know. That's ET saying the secret word. Easter group of foods.
Recent pieces.
I love Reese's Pieces. Okay. All right, so here we go. Last time we had class where I was doing the talking was the Americans signed the Treaty of Paris 1783, declaring themselves an independent nation. And now it's like, okay, now what? Okay, we're no longer under the guise of the British. Now what? Now we kind of have to run things ourselves. And so this unit is going to be about the early attempt of the Americans to run things themselves. How did it go? Okay. So this slide represents big changes that would exist in America. In many ways, we were the opposite. We, the United States, we were the opposite of what's going on in Europe. Do you think a king or a queen or a ruler of any level over in Europe cares if their peasants or serfs know how to read and write? Who cares? Just shovel. See that shovel? See that mud? They don't care about education. That's not true, but there's not this concern about the citizen in European nations being educated because you have no role in how government is going to run over there in Europe with the feudal system. But that's not true in the US. We depend upon an educated citizenry because it's citizens that will vote for the elected officials, or even, maybe crazy idea, run for office yourself. So this slide represents the truth that I'm trying to get at, and that is participation in government changed from when the US was born within a few decades. I show you as an example the 1824 election. Now again, we're back over here at 1783, and I suddenly fast forwarded about 50 years. But that's to demonstrate to you the changes that happened. In 1824, the only people that could vote were, well, let's say if you could figure it out. Who could vote? White
owned land.
men who owned land. Very good. White men who owned land. Now, there were also age restrictions, but that was up to each state. Okay. Today, are any of those requirements in place? Do you have to be white? Do you have to be male? Do you have to own land? No, obviously, then something changed between then and now. And so what we're going to do is look at, well, what changed and when? So here's the election of 1824, and you can see that nobody, this is the electoral vote pie chart, nobody won a majority of the electoral vote, which you have to do in order to be elected president. You have to win 1/2 of the electoral vote, and nobody did so. So 1824 was a very messed up election. Wait till we get to that. And you'll notice that Mr. Green here, whoever Mr. Green is, has a large piece of pie. It's the biggest piece of pie, but it's still not 1/2. So Mr. Green, whoever that is, was not elected president, at least initially. Okay. And if we go down to the popular vote, you can once again see whoever Mr. Green is got the largest piece of the popular vote, but still not a majority of the popular vote. Mr. Green is something named Jackson. That's Andrew Jackson. By the way, was 17 years old when he fought in the American Revolution. You're 17, 16, 17 years old. Look where you are. He fought in the American Revolution.
Let's go fight a war.
By the way, look where I am. I was salutatorian in my class. And here I am.
We could fight a war and
Were
we
you
steal a
actually?
$20 bill.
Hong Kong riots.
On card rights, then we could steal a $20 bill.
Number 2 in my class. But Jenny David sells jeans, so eat it, Jenny. 4 years later, in a rematch of Jackson against J.Q. Adams, who J.Q. Adams is Mr. Pink there. 4 years later, when people who did not own property could vote, you still had to be white, still had to be male, but you no longer had to own property. Jackson won an overwhelming majority. The point I'm trying to make here is, I don't really care if you know who the candidates are. We'll get to that. The point that I'm trying to make here is that now poor people can vote. Poor people can now vote, and poor people see things differently than property owners. So in this election, when property owners could vote, Jackson did not win. 4 years later, when poor people can vote, Jackson wins. Poor people can sway elections. Go ahead.
Civics, we learned about like poor people don't vote anymore. It's like the lowest amount of people who vote, like the poor.
Yep.
Like we need them.
But I'm just pointing out to you that that's not always been the case, right? That they were motivated to vote. Okay. The last, by the way, there are 4 slides to go over today. The last bit on this slide is that all states ended official church endorsement after the United States became a thing. Prior to this, as you recall, many colonies were official religious colonies. The Puritans of New England, right? The Maryland's Catholics, they were endorsing a certain religion. And if you are aware of this thing called the Constitution that exists today, there's this thing called the Constitution. And there's this thing in it called the Bill of Rights. And in the Bill of Rights, there's this thing called the First Amendment. Can Wisconsin endorse a religion according to the First Amendment? You're wrong. You're wrong. Because all the First Amendment says is Congress shall not endorse an official religion. Wisconsin is not Congress. So I kind of tricked you with my trick question here. I said according to the Constitution. But let me ask that question a different way. Can Wisconsin endorse a religion? No, they can't. 1 minute ago, I just said, according to the Constitution, can Wisconsin? Yes, they can. But can they? They can't. According to the Constitution, they can, but they can't. And that is because this is something that I would argue most Americans do not understand, and that is this. When the Supreme Court makes a ruling, the ruling becomes as constitutional as the words on the actual Constitution are. So sometime between the writing of the First Amendment and now, the Supreme Court made a ruling about state endorsement of a religion, and the Supreme Court ruled states cannot endorse religion. It doesn't say so in the Constitution, but it doesn't matter because the Supreme Court made a ruling. Is there anything in the Constitution about abortion? Is the word abortion a single time appear in the Constitution? No. It isn't in there. I've read it. It is not in there. So, is abortion constitutional today?
In some places.
In the United States? It is. But it doesn't say so in the Constitution. It doesn't matter. The Supreme Court made a ruling in 1973. So just understand, this is something you should have learned in civics. That when the Supreme Court makes a ruling, that ruling becomes constitutional law. Okay? So the fact that all states ended endorsement of churches is not because of the Bill of Rights saying that they had to. They didn't have to, according to the Constitution. Later on, a court ruling would say, yeah, they did. Okay? No more state-endorsed churches in the United States. 3 slides left. We have this annoying issue of slavery that won't die off. Okay? So you're looking at a map of the United States. The United States at this time is the yellow chunk. That's the U.S. Okay? And it says here, 1774, first CC called for elimination of slave trade. What's CC?
Continental Congress.
Very good. First Continental Congress. You'll notice the year, it's before the United States was even a thing. The United States doesn't become a nation until 1783. The First Continental Congress says, look, when we win independence, and we will, when we do, we will end the slave trade. Winky, do you understand?
Yes.
Do you understand what that says?
Yeah.
You got it.
I believe so.
Okay, Winky. I'm going to make a deal.
All right.
So the first Kia, it's 62 points.
Okay. Got it.
62 questions?
If you get this next question right that I'm about to ask,
Oh.
I will only require you to earn half the points. And if you do, I will pretend you did the whole thing for everyone in this room. Do not help him, or the answer is automatically wrong, even if he got it right. Nobody help him. It's Wink's problem. And by the way, if you get it wrong, it's not like I'm piling on. It's where it is right now. You're not being punished if he gets it wrong. It's just that he gets it right, you get frosting. Okay? All right. Okay, the word out of your mouth will either be the word true or the word false. It's one or the other, true or false. Here we go. Don't help him. Okay, so the First Continental Congress in 1774 recommended the termination of slavery. True or false? Think about it.
Recommended.
Yeah, said, hey, let's end slavery. 1774. They said end of slavery. True or false? And the word is, say the word.
Give him time. Give him time.
It's true, right? Okay. No, it's false.
Trade that they wanted to get rid of.
They got rid of the slave trade, not slavery. You'll get another chance. I'll give him another chance. Just relax, by the way. Right? You were under pressure, and it was sort of a trick question. Not really, but sort of. It was the recommendation of the slave trade. No more importing slaves from Africa. Well, if you want slavery to be perpetuated, but you cannot import Africans, where are you going to get future slaves? You're going to breed them. That's exactly right. You're going to breed them. Okay? Which is in a way worse. In a way. Okay? The next point I'm going to try and make here is this. You'll see this magical line right there that separates North and South. States north of this line, which does anyone happen to know what that line eventually became to be known as? That line? Very good. The Mason-Dixon line. Okay. States north of that line, one by one, outlawed slavery. States south of that line did not until after the Civil War against their will. But I want to make sure that we all understand the motivation behind northern states outlawing slavery. It was not because they were full of abolitionists who just loved African people. It was an economic decision. Make sure we understand this, that here we are in the South, these three rows. I am the slave owner.
Yeah, we're true.
I am going to buy each of these slaves. That means I have to house them, feed them, clothe them. If they're injured, I want to nurse them back to health. Think of them as a nice car. If you get a flat tire, you do not open the door, walk off, and say, "You're fired." That's your car. You put a new tire on it. If it runs out of gas, you fill it. You park it in the garage. The garage is the housing. The gas is the food. The new tire is the medical care. You take care of your car. But in the North, the conclusion of factory owners, factories were in the North mainly, was why would I pay that much for a car when I can pay pennies for an immigrant? And all I have to do is pay those immigrants a salary. And those salaries, they would have to buy their own food, clothing, and shelter. And if they were injured, I would fire them. Understand that people in the North were not swell and people in the South were racist. People in the North and South were both shrewd. They both made economic decisions. Northern factory owners said it's cheaper to pay for immigrants. People in the South said it's cheaper to pay for slaves. And they were both right. They were both right. Okay. Two other big ideas that exist on this slide. Did you know that Martin Luther King Jr. was alive in the 1700s?
Wow.
He wasn't. But he represents something that I'm trying to codify here, and that is the idea of civic virtue. Let's travel back to Europe. The kings and the queens and the princes didn't care about the citizenry of the peasants and the serfs. Who cares? Mud, shovel. But in the US, we depend upon civic virtue, which is this idea that all of us should contribute to the public good, that we're motivated by what's good for the nation. You'll do the right thing. And of course, you and I are like, well, yeah, of course. But back then, what? And then the last idea is represented by this awesome cartoon that I found. So there's Mr. White Guy, see? Look, kitten, I don't give a damn what you think. If I say I'm a feminist, then by God, I am one. I just loved it. I just like that cartoon. Look at how he's talking to her. I'm a feminist, damn it. Republican motherhood goes something like this. You women have a role to play. The role that you play is to raise our leaders. Now, those leaders, men of course, will go and run the nation, but your job is to raise them to do the right thing. Republican mother, you're the mother of the people who will run the republic. Now, if you follow this story arc, this is the first time that we've seen this idea. If you follow the story arc to its logical conclusion, you will get to the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. If they're so good at raising our leaders, why don't we let them lead? And maybe someday a female president. Maybe. Okay. Any questions on this? This has some big ideas on it. I'm still trying to think of another question for Winky so that he can redeem himself.
Yes.
Okay. Slide number 3 of 4. When the United States became an independent nation, we joined a global trade network. When we were colonies, we were part of the British trade network. Does anyone remember what that was called? That that certainly was part of it. It was called mercantilism. Cook's having a good day.
Yeah.
Wink gets it. Okay, but now that we're an independent nation, we join freely. We join this trade network. We have things to export. We have things to import. We're joining that. Now, what we'll see in the coming chapters is the British attempt to thwart our attempt to trade, because I don't know if you know this, but the British wanted us back. They thought that revolution was a mistake, and they're going to try and fix it. That's why the War of 1812, which was just a few decades later. Okay. The second big economic current that I'm going to try and introduce to you is this. It's a fascinating chart. This represents the amount of debt the U.S. has ever been in ever. I mean, there's the day we were born, and there's 2010. So I suppose it's not quite updated. I could add another 10 years. But this represents the comparison numerator over denominator of debt over GDP. Now, do we have anybody that knows what GDP is? Did you take civics?
Global something.
Gross domestic product.
And what is that?
It's your total like value kind of.
You are awesome. Okay, very good. GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced in a country in a year. So every shirt that's made in the United States, and every computer, and every phone, and every car, and if you added it all up, you get a really big number. Okay, put that as the denominator in an equation, and then over it, put the amount of debt that we have. If the top number is bigger than the bottom number, then you go up this scale. The bigger the top number is than the bottom number, the more debt compared to the GDP, the higher up you go. Now, is going high on this chart good?
No.
Okay, that means a lot of debt. But you got to be careful about automatically concluding, wow, that must have been really bad. Whatever happened there, that's bad. You have to be careful about making that conclusion, because sometimes debt is the best way to handle a problem. For example, this thing represents this rather bad thing called World War II. That's a rather bad event in world history. Okay? It's bad. And because the United States handled it by going heavily into debt, the U.S. won. Hey, imagine this. You're in a car and you get in an accident and there goes your arm. So you go and you pick up your arm. How can you pick up your arm? You have another arm. Okay, use your other arm to pick up your first arm. Okay? You grab your arm, you go to the hospital, and they're about to operate when the doctor says, wait a minute. Do you realize how much this is going to cost? Now, as you're laying on the table, do you think, oh, yeah, hold on a second. You got a pad of paper, and then you write a pro and a con list, and all right, do it, doctor. Right? No, you just say, just fix me. I'll worry about paying this off later. Did we worry about debt while we were fighting the Nazis? No, we paid it off later. Okay. If, by the way, you want to know where we're at right now, we're right about there. Both the Obama and the Trump administrations are spending rots and rots. Yes. Sure it is. Increase taxes and cut spending, and you will pay off your debt. Sure. Not easy. Okay. Now, I want to notice something. The day the U.S. was born, 1783, not only was the United States in debt, wars are expensive. I'm trying to get across to you the idea that wars are expensive. Well, how was the U.S. born? Out of war. Not only was the U.S. in debt, each state was in debt. Each state was in debt. Oh, I got your question. I got it. All right. Either the word north or south will come out of your mouth. Okay? Now, this is really based on your prior knowledge of the Revolutionary War rather than anything that we learned in class today. Okay. So, where was most of the war fought? Hold on, don't say anything yet. And as a result, that region of the country was more heavily in debt because they did most of the fighting. So they had to buy most of the uniforms and most of the guns and most of the food and most of the salary. So it's either the word north or the word south. where was most of the Revolutionary War fought? And as a result, that's where most of the debt was. North or south? You're right.
Oh!
He's right. I thought he would get it wrong. I was fairly confident he'd get it wrong. Okay, so I will honor my promise. The chapter 9 Kia, you only have to only have to earn half the points, and I will double your score, is what I'm saying. If on a 60 you earn 10, you now earn 20. No, you don't get extra credit. There's no extra credit in here.
Come on, bro.
Okay.
What if we get like five wrong? Will you just give us the 5 points and give us 100%?
Yeah, but you've earned over a half.
Sounds good.
I will double your score, but you cannot earn extra credit. Okay. Nice job, Wayne. All right.
Thank you, Tyson. Yeah, Tyson.
So understand that the North was heavily in debt. That will matter later. Let's go back to now what? Here they are, the 13 original states. Each state was, big word there, sovereign. What does that mean? I heard it. Independent. You had 13 sort of independent entities that, had a common foe, but they're gone, right? The British are gone, supposedly. And now there's this attempt to say, okay, what are we? We know we're not them, but what are we? Are we a nation of one people? Each state had their own army, their own navy, their own currency. Any of you go to Mall of America? Can you imagine if that were true? You would have to trade in your Wisconsin money for Minnesota money so that you could buy things at Mall of America. Okay. Not only that, but they taxed each other's stuff. States did. States taxed. You know this trade war that I know maybe you don't know, but the United States right now is taxing things from China, and the Chinese are responding by taxing things from America. American products are being taxed when they're sold to China, and Chinese products are being taxed when they come to the United States, making everything more expensive. Well, the 13 states taxed each other's stuff, making everything more expensive. Okay, so this was a loosely affiliated group of states binding together. When you have a loosely affiliated group that sort of binds themselves together, that's what a confederation is. The Confederate States of America, for example, 11 states that sort of agreed with each other. Okay. And so what the Second Continental Congress did, the CC, was write a document, a constitution, which was eventually ratified right in the middle of the Revolutionary War, 1781. And basically what it does is it gives each state one vote. No matter how large you are, no matter how small you are. The most populous state was New York, or it was Virginia. I think it was Virginia. Largest state was Virginia. The smallest state was Delaware. They each got one vote. Okay. But what they also did, this is the sort of the interesting part, and that is they said, okay, what if more states want to join? How do we handle that? Okay. So the Articles of Confederation spelled out how more states could join. Because as you recall, so we're looking at this bottom map here. Where's the western border of the U.S.? What natural thing? No. I heard it. Mississippi River. Okay. The Mississippi River. But the states ended here. The states ended there. But the nation ended there. So if the red are the states, but the nation is right here, then my question to you is, well, then what is all this? What is it? They're not states, but they're part of the nation. Well, then what is it? It's a territory. Very good. It's a territory. Territories are not states. States are what you have to live in to vote for president. Well, what if you lived out here? Then you don't vote for president. You're not a state. But obviously we know that these things became states eventually. These states became states eventually. These territories became states. What I'm asking you, what we're trying to do is say, well, okay, how do you become a state? How does that happen? There are the original 13. Anyone happen to know? What's state 14? What's the first post 13 colony state? No.
New Hampshire.
No, New Hampshire's right there. Oh, I can see it. Yeah. It was Kentucky. The 14th state was Kentucky.
It's by like North Carolina.
Yeah, the rest of that territory, and there was like.
Look different. Sure did. So, I want to remind you that when the British had the 13 colonies in Australia and New Zealand and India and Canada, that all those colonies existed for the benefit of mother country. Remember what that was called? Mercantilism. That's right. You're not equal to us. You're secondary. We're primary, you're secondary. But what the US did was say, we're not doing it that way. Any new states are totally equal to the original 13, which is kind of amazing. It's the opposite of the way the British handled it. And if you decided to move out here and you see a nice spot, what they did was they surveyed it, right? So surveyors would go out here and they'd get land ready, and then they'd put posts. And then if you grabbed the post, you got that plot of land. Who did you pay? Who did you buy the land from? The federal government. The federal government owns all territories. Okay? That's even true today. The federal government owns about 90% of Nevada today. About half of California. Area 51. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Area 50. He lives
Okay. That's enough note taking for today. I have something to give you. Now, you can't say I never give you anything. I'm giving you documents. You're welcome. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
I appreciate you.
Hey, when are the permission slips due?
The 23rd.
Okay. So this packet that I'm one short, don't worry, I will get this to you by tomorrow, is full of documents, only you'll notice that the length of the documents is much, much longer than the previous set of documents. Right. So document 1 is about a page, document 2 is about a page and a half, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to number you 1 through 7. 1 through 7. Please remember your number. 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4 and the 5 and the 6 and the 7. And the 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4 and the 5 and the 6 and the 7. And the 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4 and the 5 and the 6 and the 7. And the 1 and the 2 and the 3.
Rest in peace. I got 7.
Relax.
There
Relax.
isn't a 7.
Will you relax? Document 1 is the first. I'm going to borrow yours for a second. Document 1 is from this guy named Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was a Federalist. That's a political party. Today we have Democrats and Republicans. We didn't always have those two parties. He was a Federalist. He was a liberal. And what that means is he believed that the federal government should do things, should have power, should have authority. This document is written by Alexander Hamilton about his view of taxes. Right? So the British are defeated, and part of the reason that the Americans went to war against the British was because unfair taxes. So they're gone. And then the United States creates this new federal government that imposes taxes. And Hamilton says, yeah, but it's different. So this document is why Hamilton believes that taxes were fair. Can you find his arguments, plural? Why taxes were fair. Okay. The next document, 2's, is Jefferson's response. Jefferson was a conservative, and he belonged to a political party called the Democratic Republicans. And if you're thinking, hey, that must have been the party that split into the Democrats and the Republicans, you're wrong. They were just called the Democratic Republicans. It has nothing to do with today's Democrats or Republicans. So if Hamilton is arguing that taxes are fair, Jefferson will argue, no, they're not. Why not? What's wrong with those taxes that the new U.S. government is imposing upon its citizens? What's unfair about them? Can you find his logic? What are his reasons? That's 2. Document number 3 is about something called the Sedition Act. John Allen is a Federalist. He belongs to the same political party as Hamilton. And he argues that the Sedition Act was a good idea. The sedition, can you right now raise your hand and say, I think Trump's an idiot? Can you do that? I don't mean can you as in go ahead. I mean, can you legally do that?
Yeah.
How many of you agree with her? That she has the right to express her negative views of our president? Are you sure?
Yes.
Nowadays, yeah.
Okay, well, let's revisit that idea. This law, the Sedition Act, was an attempt to limit criticism of the President of the United States. And the Federalists thought it was a good idea. It was a good idea to limit critical speech. Why? 3's. Why? Document 4 would be the response. And it's from something named Horatius, which actually was a guy by the name of George Hay, but he didn't want anyone to know it was George Hay, so he wrote in a pseudonym, right? He gave himself a Greek name, okay? And he wrote this in a newspaper as something named Horatius, so that no one would know. So what's wrong with the Sedition Act? What's wrong with it? 5's, you're talking about something called the Kentucky Resolution. So let's back up. The Sedition Act limited speech. That was critical of the president. The Sedition Act limited speech. And some people said that's stupid. That violates the First Amendment, free speech and all that. And people in Kentucky said, yeah, that's a dumb law. We should ignore it. Can states ignore federal laws? I mean, today, if the United States passed a law saying every Monday after a Vikings victory, everyone in the nation shall wear purple, could Wisconsin say we are not doing that and pass their own law nullifying the federal law? Can states nullify national laws? First you shook and then you don't know. Okay. Well, that's what Kentucky did. Can they do that? Here is Thomas Jefferson arguing about a state and why it should be able to nullify. So 5's, Jefferson's argument for why states should be able to nullify federal laws, why they should be able to. Okay.
What's the actual answer?
6's and 7's, we need to split this incredibly long document. Document 6 is 3 pages. So we're going to draw a line on page, not the first part of the document, not even the second part of the document, but on the third part of the document. Draw a line between the paragraph that starts with the word Sparta and the paragraph that starts with the word Carthage. Just draw a line right between those two. Everything before that is for the 6's. Everything after it is for the 7's. After is for the 7's. Before is for the 6's. Between Sparta and Carthage. Draw a line. Okay. Document 6 is the argument for why states should not be able to nullify federal laws. So Jefferson's arguing, yeah, states like Kentucky should be able to pass their own law, saying that the federal law is null and void. And Hamilton says, you can't do that. You can't have states ignoring federal law. Well, why not? Why can't you have states ignore federal law?
Because.
Okay? That's your job. And My request is that you have, there you go. My request is that you have a good faith attempt at looking at this document for tomorrow.
Dear sir.
That's right. Okay, any questions? All right, you do have about 10-ish minutes, right? 3:17, and it's only 3:08. So a few minutes. I'm going to print that off for you right now.
It's like 9 minutes.
Your 9 minutes.
Yes.
You can go to your locker.
No.